The book we are sharing today is called Peak: Secrets from the New Science of Expertise. There is a well-known concept called the 10,000-hour rule. But in reality, 10,000 hours is not a universal truth. The author of Peak, Ericsson, tells us that 10,000 hours are only effective under the condition of deliberate practice. Ericsson was a professor of psychology at Florida State University and the originator of the deliberate practice framework. He primarily studied how outstanding individuals in various fields, such as sports, music, chess, medicine, and the military, achieve their exceptional performance. He found that the achievements of these distinguished figures all have one thing in common. They followed the principles of deliberate practice. When Peak was published in 2016, it immediately became a bestseller with astonishing sales. I have been studying knowledge management for a long time, and of all the books I have read on high-efficiency learning methods, I can say that Peak is the one that explains training methods most thoroughly and profoundly. This book not only helps us clarify many vague concepts, but even subverts some of our cognitions and viewpoints about learning. Therefore, this book will surely become a classic in the field of learning. There are three main ideas in this book that are incredibly enlightening. First, why can training create a genius? Aren't geniuses born? Second, training can be divided into effective and ineffective training. How should we distinguish between them? Third, the most powerful and effective learning method to date is deliberate practice. What exactly is deliberate practice? Let's look at these three ideas, one by one. First, let's look at why it is said that genius can be forged through training. Mozart is widely recognized as a musical genius. He held a major concert at the age of 7, which shocked the music world. But that's not all. What's even more astonishing is that Mozart could distinguish the pitch of any musical note at the age of 4, even the pitch of sounds like a clock chime or a person's sneeze. This ability, known as perfect pitch, is extremely rare, occurring in about 1 in every 10,000 people. Mozart's ability has long been used as a prime example to prove that talent is innate. It seems that a genius is a genius because of their extraordinary innate abilities. Is this really the case? In 2004, a Japanese psychologist conducted an experiment. He recruited 24 children between the ages of 2 and 6. After 1 year of training, all 24 children had developed perfect pitch. This means that with training, one can achieve the same performance as a genius. The author analyzes that Mozart's so-called talent was also likely the result of training. It is known that by the time Mozart was 4 years old, his father was already teaching him music full-time, and the intensity of his daily music training was even higher than that of the 24 children. Training is what forged the genius. In the past, we believed that in some fields, some people are good because they have talent, while others do not. Those with talent can succeed if their potential is tapped, while those without talent are not cut out for it, no matter how much they practice. What do talent and genius mean? They imply something one is born with, but the author shatters this view. He says that so-called potential can all be developed through training, just as running and fitness can build muscles. With the right methods, potential can be trained. This view completely subverts traditional cognition. The human body and brain have a strong adaptability. Through deliberate training, the body's adaptive capacity can be greatly changed. For example, what do you think is the world record for push-ups? 500 or 1,000? In 1980, a Japanese man did 10,007. Exaggerated. That's not all. In 1993, an American did 46,001 push-ups in just 21 hours. My goodness. Where are the limits of the human body? Through training, physical fitness can be strengthened to the point of doing more than 40,000 push-ups in 21 hours. The brain is the same. After deliberate practice, the brain can also develop potential that it did not previously possess. In London, the road conditions are so complex that even GPS systems can get confused. Therefore, to become a taxi driver in London, one must pass what is known as the world's most difficult test. To pass the taxi test, drivers must undergo a large amount of high-intensity training. Experimental studies have found that after high-intensity training, the hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for navigation of the drivers who passed the test, had grown significantly larger than before. A similar phenomenon has been observed in blind people. After losing their sight, they undergo extensive training to read Braille with their fingers, and the corresponding part of their brains also become more developed. Therefore, the author says that we can change the body's adaptability through extensive training. We can create potential and talent, and thus create geniuses. We might then ask, why have we been in school and received training all this time, yet have not been trained to be geniuses? The author says that's because the training method is wrong. Training methods are divided into effective and ineffective, and most of us often fall into ineffective training. How do we distinguish between effective and ineffective training? This is the second insight the author gives us. Imagine a child practicing the piano. A teacher comes over and asks, "I see you practice for an hour every day, but you fail every test. Can you explain why?" The student says, "I don't know why. I practice every day." The teacher asks, "How many times did you practice it?" The student says, 10 or 20 times. The teacher asks again, "How many times did you play it correctly?" The student says, "I don't know, maybe once or twice." The teacher then asks, "So how did you practice?" The student says, "I don't know, I just kept practicing." Does this scene sound familiar? We are always doing homework, solving problems, running or playing chess, but we have not become top students, athletes, or chess masters. Because we are engaged in naive practice. Although we are working hard, we are not conducting effective training. In fact, most people have 3 misconceptions about practice. The first is that practice may not be very useful, and ability is mainly limited by genes. Some people might say, "I'm not good with math, my spatial reasoning is weak, I have a poor sense of direction," or "I can't do better." But the author says that anyone can change themselves through the right training. The key is to have the right mindset. The second misconception is that as long as you practice long enough, your ability will gradually improve. But the author says that if doing something long enough made you good enough, then there wouldn't be so many street-side chess players who have played for years but are still poor at it. In fact, doing something over and over in the exact same way does not improve performance. It can sometimes lead to stagnation and a slow decline in skill level. The third misconception about practice is that as long as you work hard enough and are diligent enough, you will improve and become more excellent. For example, I want to become a better manager. I want to sell more products. I want to make the team more cohesive, so I must work harder. But the author says that unless you have a specific and appropriate practice method, even doubling your efforts will not lead to significant progress. Think about our school days. There was always that most diligent, hard-working student sitting in the corner studying extra hard every day, but their exam results were always poor. Effective practice does not equal long hours of practice, nor does it equal repetitive practice. Only practice with the right method is truly effective. So what kind of practice method is considered effective? The author says a very important method is called purposeful practice. What is purposeful practice? Let's go back to the previous example of the child practicing the piano. Suppose his training process was like this. He sets a goal for himself, such as playing the piece 3 times in a row without any mistakes and at the appropriate speed. As long as this standard is not met, he will look for the reason. Imagine if this child practiced with such a standard every night. Would his progress be faster? Therefore, purposeful practice is, first of all, a method of continuous improvement, accumulating small wins to achieve a big victory and taking small steps to travel 1,000 miles. Second, you must be focused during training and not be absent-minded. We often just do things without thinking carefully, as Sherlock Holmes said. You see, but you do not observe. In addition, purposeful practice has another requirement. There must be timely feedback. If you do a problem and don't know if it's right or wrong, your progress will be very slow. Finally, another very important factor is that you must step out of your comfort zone to train. Imagine an amateur pianist who started learning in his teens and is still playing the same way 30 years later. Even if he has completed the 10,000 hours of genius training, he will not become a genius. Why? Because he has not stepped out of his comfort zone. Effective practice is purposeful training that breaks through the comfort zone. Only in this way can rapid progress be made. So, will we become geniuses if we engage in purposeful practice? The author says no. Although purposeful practice is very effective, it is far from enough to cultivate a genius-level ability. To reach a genius level, a more efficient method is needed, and that is deliberate practice. Deliberate practice is a type of purposeful practice, and is the most effective method for improving and training skills discovered by humans so far. So what is deliberate practice? Before discussing deliberate practice, we must first ask ourselves a question. What are our efforts and diligence actually training? Speed, musicality. Technique? No. The author says that the core of what we are truly training is our mental representations. What are mental representations? This is a term from cognitive psychology, which refers to the corresponding mental structures when thinking about things. It sounds abstract, so let's use an example. For an amateur chess player, watching a game is just seeing individual pieces move. But for a master, in addition to seeing the changes in the game on the board, he can also see the strengths and weaknesses of both sides, the future trends, the opponent's possible strategies, and his own possible countermeasures. Have you noticed that for the same thing, novices and professionals see the depth and height of the problem differently? In other words, their cognitive modules and cognitive structures are different, and this difference is the different mental representations. For experts, they can organize complex and large amounts of information into cognitive modules and use these modules to think about and deal with problems. When faced with a new situation, they can quickly call up some past cognitive modules, thus having a more efficient method for thinking and solving problems. For example, people with no experience in playing soccer think that the 20+ people from both teams on the field are just running around chaotically, and as long as the ball comes to their feet, they should just go for it. But professional players will find patterns. Someone conducted an experiment where they had professional players watch a video of a real soccer match. When a player had just received a pass, they paused the video and asked the experimental subjects, what will this player do next? Will he dribble, shoot, or pass? The more outstanding the player, the more accurate their prediction of the next move. In other words, a key difference between professional-level players and ordinary players, and between genius-level figures and ordinary-level figures, is formed in their mental representations of problems. So, understanding this point means understanding the purpose of deliberate practice. Our purpose is essentially to build a more powerful mental representation to think about problems, and deliberate practice is currently the most powerful and efficient training method discovered by humans. So what is deliberate practice? The author says that, strictly speaking, there are two criteria for judging deliberate practice. First, the field you are training in is a well-developed industry with a complete set of mature evaluation standards and efficient methods. Second, you must have an excellent coach who can assign you training tasks and provide timely feedback. Only when these two conditions are met is it, strictly speaking, deliberate practice. According to this requirement, there may be very few industries that meet the criteria for this strict sense of deliberate practice. Perhaps only a few like chess, ballet, gymnastics, and musical performance. For example, violin training is a relatively typical example where the method of deliberate practice can be used. Its skill set is very standardized, and the playing methods have mostly been trained and improved over decades or even hundreds of years. If you can find an excellent teacher, they can tell you what is the correct, and even the best, way to hold the violin, how to move the bow most effectively when playing sortie, etc. These are methods that you cannot quickly achieve through your own exploration and training, or you would have to take many detours. Therefore, in the field of violin, there are often very young genius-level players because they have first-rate teachers and mature and reasonable skills and methods. As long as they continue to practice deliberately, they can become experts in this field. However, most of our industries do not meet this standard. In many cases, there is no most efficient system of methods, and no first-rate coaches who specialize in coaching. So what should we do? The author says we can settle for the next best thing and use the principles of deliberate practice to train as much as possible. What are the principles of deliberate practice? First, clarify your high-performance goals. Which aspect of ability do I want to improve? Second, we should try our best to find the most outstanding experts, masters, or classic books in this field, so that we can compare with the high-level mental representations in this field and obtain high-quality feedback. Third, Study the possible reasons behind the success of these outstanding individuals or successful cases. Fourth, we must continuously invest time and energy in training. These 4 points are the principles of deliberate practice. This principle sounds simple, but if it can be applied effectively, the results are amazing. In the early days of the Vietnam War, the performance of the US Navy pilots was actually very poor. In the first 5 months of 1968, the US Navy shot down 9 Vietnamese planes, but lost about 10 of their own. What's more exaggerated is that the pilots fired 50 air-to-air missiles, but not a single one hit the target. Under these circumstances, the US Navy had to think, how can we improve the pilots' abilities and quickly equip them with the standards of first-rate pilots? This led to the development of the famous Top Gun training program. The plan was this. First, select the most outstanding pilots to be instructors and have them simulate the combat tactics of Vietnamese fighter jets, forming the Red Team. Then, select the excellent pilots who are second only to these instructors as students, forming the Blue Team. Next, have the Red Team and the Blue Team engage in daily combat. Because the instructor team was more experienced, they often pushed the students to the brink of failure, forcing them to make combat decisions in urgent, dangerous, or various complex situations. After the combat, the instructors and students would communicate and review the experience on the same day to summarize what they learned. The instructors shared their thought and judgment processes, and the students looked for ways to improve. The next day, they would train again with the new methods. After such continuous and repeated training, by 1970, when this group of US Navy pilots was deployed to the battlefield again, they achieved an astonishing record of shooting down 12.5 enemy aircraft for every one of their own lost. The huge success behind this Top Gun program followed the principles of deliberate practice, clear goals, the best teachers, training outside the comfort zone, timely feedback and improvement, and continuous high-intensity training. The entire process was one that followed the principles of deliberate practice. You might say, this method of deliberate practice is good, but I'm so busy with work. Where can I find a whole block of time to train, and I have to find an excellent mentor? It's too difficult, the author says. That's true, but we can completely adopt a strategy of learning while working and apply the principles of deliberate practice without stopping our work. For example, sales skills have always been tacit knowledge and difficult to improve. The author mentions a company called Blue Bunny that used the principles of deliberate practice to train the sales abilities of their sales managers at work. Every year, the company would gather the best performing senior sales managers for a few meetings to discuss the next sales strategy. However, past meetings were often a formality. So what did they do? The company came up with a method. During the meetings, they had one senior sales manager simulate a real company client, while another would sell the company's products to them. The other senior managers would observe the entire sales process and provide feedback, telling them what was done well in this sale, what could be changed, and what experience they could share. The next day, this sales manager would summarize the experience and conduct another sale. And then the others would evaluate and provide feedback again. The company recorded this entire process on video. In this way, the sales skills of the entire team were improved. You see, this process does not require you to undergo full-time training. Just integrating the principles of deliberate practice into daily work can lead to huge achievements. But you might say, what if I want to improve an ability, but I don't know any outstanding mentors or have such high-level friends? What should I do then? The author says, if you don't have a mentor, you can still apply the principles of deliberate practice to improve your ability by using case studies and high-quality books. For example, Benjamin Franklin, one of the founding fathers of the United States, had a limited education in his early years and could barely write a coherent sentence. However, he really wanted to improve his writing skills. By chance, he saw a magazine called The Spectator and found that the quality of the articles was very high. He especially hoped that he could also write such beautiful articles, but he didn't know these excellent authors to get feedback from them. Like did he do? He began to imitate the writing style of the articles in this magazine. At first, he would imitate their phrasing. How would I write this sentence myself? I'll compare my way with his. Is his better, or is mine better? Why is theirs better? After improving his vocabulary, he still felt that something was wrong with his articles. He then noticed that the structure and logic of his articles were also incorrect, so he broke down the paragraphs of the articles in The Spectator and reorganized them himself. What would I write first, and what would I write later? Why does the author have a different order? Through his constant study and research, Franklin became one of the most respected writers in American history. His works, Paul Richard's Almanac, and his later autobiography, have become classics in American literary history. You see, Franklin actually used the principles of deliberate practice to solve a problem that most of us face. I want to improve my ability, but I don't know any experts and can't afford such a professional mentor. What should I do? We can use the principles of deliberate practice to break down high-level cases and books to help us improve. You see, in the case just now, Franklin, without a mentor, improved his skills by studying high-level cases, analyzing the possible reasons for their success, and then deliberately and repeatedly practicing and constantly improving. But there is another situation. What if there are no classic books in my field, and the opinions of industry experts are not necessarily correct? What should I do? The author says that in such a situation, we must return to the essence of deliberate practice to establish timely, high-quality feedback between our actions and the results to improve efficiency. The author gives an example of American radiologists who use X-ray photos to diagnose and analyze breast cancer patients. As their years of practice increased, their diagnostic ability did not improve significantly and sometimes even regressed. Why? It turns out that a radiologist might look at about 1,000 X-ray photos and find only 4 to 8 cancerous features. So the number of times a doctor receives effective feedback is very small. And even in these few cases where the doctor thinks an X-ray might show cancerous lesions, due to privacy reasons, the case goes to the patient's private doctor, and the radiologist does not know if their judgment was correct. Moreover, in this field, there were no particularly effective methods in the past to improve the ability to interpret X-ray photos. Even the most experienced experts could not guarantee that all their judgments were correct. At this time, how can the diagnostic ability of doctors be improved? The author proposed his solution. Use the principles of deliberate practice to strengthen the feedback between decisions and results, then find the gap and train deliberately how to do it specifically. The author suggests collecting the cases of patients who underwent X-ray diagnosis over many years, finding the corresponding actual medical records of the patients, and then compiling valuable cases from them. These are the case photos with special feedback effects, such as when the radiologist did not find any problems in the photo at the time, but the patient later developed the disease, or when the doctor initially judged that there were cancerous lesions, but it was actually a misdiagnosis. These compiled valuable cases become good materials for training doctors. They can study why their diagnosis was problematic and how to improve by re-diagnosing these X-ray photos with known outcomes. In this way, radiologists can turn what might have been one instance of inefficient feedback training per year into dozens of effective feedback training sessions per day. Thus, after applying the principles of deliberate practice, the diagnostic accuracy of radiologists has been greatly improved. This is a method of using the principles of deliberate practice to improve efficiency in a job without effective feedback. We often encounter such situations in our work. Your job is a link in the entire project process. For example, if you are a graphic designer or a programming and development technician, if we don't know how our results affect the outcome, our workability is difficult to improve. After working for a few years, you'll feel like you are resting on your laurels. The principles of deliberate practice tell us we must find ways to establish a connection between our work and the final result. For example, in this graphic design project, which parts did the client praise, which parts was the client dissatisfied with, and what were the reasons? You can discuss improvement plans with your colleagues and relevant department personnel, and then practice deliberately yourself and continue to improve next time, thus continuously improving your own abilities. The above is the main content of deliberate practice. We can see that to grow rapidly in a field, the best way is to have first-rate people give you guidance and feedback. You can learn the correct concepts and methods in the first instance, thereby greatly improving learning efficiency. This is deliberate practice, and this is why in a few fields, the highest level teachers and methods combined with high-intensity training can create geniuses. However, in fields that do not have such conditions, we can still settle for the next best thing and make the most of the principles of deliberate practice to learn from the practices of outstanding individuals and study the possible reasons for their success, constantly trying to improve. Finally, let's review. The book Peak proposes 3 ideas that are very inspiring to us. First, geniuses can be trained. We can change the structure of our brain and body through high-intensity training, thereby producing miraculous abilities like talent. Second, why are most people not trained to be geniuses? It is because we often engage in ineffective training. Only purposeful training, the kind that keeps us focused, provides timely feedback, constantly sets goals, and pushes us out of our comfort zone, can allow us to make rapid progress. Third, for the training of geniuses, purposeful practice is not enough. We must further use deliberate practice, find the most outstanding and distinguished mentors to guide us, and then constantly ponder the reasons for others' success, and continuously train and improve to achieve the greatest progress.